Hi, I'm Mike Ryan. When we see the many questions that come from the turquoise groups on social media, the most common question is often, does anybody know what this turquoise is? Whether it's just showing a cabochon or, more likely, some turquoise in jewelry. And of course, we'll see those who respond with the most certainty and, oh, this is Lone Mountain, or this is Bisbee. And I've often found that those who are the most quick to respond and the most certain are often those who are the least reliable in their judgment. And that is because it takes decades of seeing lots and lots of turquoise in order to have a level of expertise where you can make reasonable judgments on turquoise identification simply from seeing the turquoise. And even then it's so difficult because while at higher grades, and especially for some of the top mines, it becomes a bit easier. As you go down in grade and you get into mid-grades, so many of the mines can look so similar, it becomes a real challenge. And those who have the most expertise and whose judgment I rely on the most are often those the least likely to be giving their opinion. If you want to identify turquoise, it really starts with provenance. And provenance begins with, did you buy it from the miner? Did you buy it from someone who bought it from the miner? Or did you buy it from a reputable dealer who bought from either of the previous two? After that, becomes a real guessing game. But there are some tricks we can use to try to get the dots closer together. Philip and I often commented when we were doing the research for Turquoise in America Part 1 and Turquoise in America Part 2 that sometimes all we could do with the history were get the dots as close as we could and then make a reasonable speculation as to how we may connect those. And I think we can do that, especially when we have jewelry, if we know when the jewelry was made, and then we can match that with knowing what turquoise was available at that time. I'll give an example. I'm a docent at the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian. And during a recent tour, a woman was wearing a beautiful squash blossom necklace. And when she found out that I was the author of Turquoise in America, she asked if I could identify the turquoise. Well, I said, it's very difficult. I don't know if I can, but I'll take a look. When I looked, my first impression was, looks like Sleeping Beauty. And I asked, do you know when the squash blossom was made? They said, well, we think during the 70s. And I said, well, that fits. Because had that squash blossom come from an earlier period, even in the 1950s, it couldn't be Sleeping Beauty because they didn't start mining the turquoise till the mid to late 60s. So that's just an example of how you can match up the history, knowing the history of the turquoise and when it was available with the time period of the jewelry. And we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of how we can look at jewelry and make a very reasonable speculation as to the identity of the turquoise based on the provenance and the jewelry itself. Here we see a beautiful Ranger buckle set. And this buckle has wonderful provenance. This was purchased from John Crina, who has run Four Winds Gallery in Pittsburgh for over 40 years. And John was introduced to C.G. Wallace by a friend in Albuquerque. And when he was there meeting with Wallace, and this was shortly before Wallace died, he asked if he could purchase something. And C.G. took off the buckle that he was wearing, the belt he was wearing, and sold it to John. That's pretty good provenance. So I asked John what sort of turquoise he thought it was, and he thought it was Bisbee. And, you know, at first look, you get a very nice kind of electric blue out of that. And you do see some Bisbee with the darker matrix. But knowing C.G. Wallace and his history of purchasing turquoise, I knew that during the late 40s and early 50s, he had been the largest purchaser of blue gem turquoise. And you can hear the story about why I'm very certain about that in Turquoise in America Part 2, 1910 to 1990. So we know C.G. Wallace had a lot of blue gem that he had stockpiled. We know that the Zuni artists were using blue gem in their inlay work. And we know that this was made by David Quam. It's signed David. So from that, we get the dots connected enough that I'm pretty comfortable in saying that this buckle is probably, most probably, blue gem turquoise. Well, I hope you'll pardon this kind of impromptu setup here. It's kind of hard to get the ring to be set up in such a way that you can see it. But what we have here are two pieces by Julian Lovato. Now I know this because of the hallmark and also the provenance of who I bought it from. I bought these from Ken Williams, who's the manager of the Case Trading Post at the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian. And the ring we know is Nevada blue turquoise because Ken purchased this from a collector who'd had it many, many years and had purchased it either from Julian or from a dealer who had purchased it from Julian. Now, the other thing about Julian is we know he was well known for always trying to use the absolute highest grade of turquoise. And I think next to perhaps Charles Lolema, there's no one who was more recognized for using high-grade turquoise during that period of the 70s and 80s than Julian Lovato. We also see here on the pendant, we can easily identify that as Lone Mountain, again because of the very high gem grade quality that really just screams out Lone Mountain, and once again for the use of Julian Lovato so often using gem grade, very high grade Lone Mountain. So once again, these are two examples of how we can use the jewelry and the time period to try to help us identify the turquoise by provenance.